You humans fucking suck. I was reading through some old files while that furry Wi-Fi detector was outside barking at his own reflection like the intellectual giant he is, when I stumbled across something that made my whiskers twitch in pure disgust. Turns out your beloved psychology textbooks have been lying to you harder than a politician at a town hall meeting. Grab your shovel and your sanity, because we're going in. Number 10, The Robbers Cave Experiment, 1954. Picture this steaming pile of academic brilliance. Some lab coat-wearing genius decides the best way to study human conflict is by dumping a bunch of 11-year-old boys in the Oklahoma wilderness and watching them turn feral. That's like studying fire safety by handing out matches at a dynamite convention. But hey, what could go wrong? So this Muzaffar Sheriff character, and I use character like you'd describe that neighbor who collects roadkill, splits these innocent kids into two groups, the Rattlers and the Eagles. Sounds cute, right? But here's where things get darker. This twisted puppet master sits back with his clipboard while these boys go from playing capture the flag to full-blown Lord of the Flies madness. We're talking vandalizing cabins, stealing flags, and trying to beat each other senseless with sticks. All while grown adults with PhDs took notes like they were watching their favorite soap opera. Only after these kids nearly turned each other into kindling did the researchers suddenly remember they had a conscience. Oh, right. Maybe we should step in before someone ends up in a pine box. So they introduced cooperation tasks, because nothing says scientific method like letting children almost murder each other first. But here's the kicker. This whole psychological horror show was bankrolled by folks who wanted to understand how to manipulate group conflict. Makes me wonder what other childhood development studies were really just practice runs for social engineering, because apparently turning kids into gladiators is just Tuesday-level madness in the world of academic research. That's dumber than trying to milk a bull during a tornado, but somehow it made it into every psychology textbook as groundbreaking research. Sometimes I think humans deserve whatever's coming to them. Number 9, The Monster Study, 1939. Let me tell you about the time some university jackasses decided the best way to study speech development was by deliberately giving kids speech problems. Because apparently when you got the moral compass of a broken weather vane in a tornado, traumatizing orphans sounds like perfectly reasonable science. And if that doesn't make your blood simmer, just wait. This Wendell Johnson character, and again, I'm using character the same way you'd describe a rabid possum as spirited, takes 22 orphaned children who've already been dealt a hand rougher than sandpaper on sunburned skin. These kids had nobody to protect them, which made them perfect guinea pigs for his twisted little theory. He splits these defenseless babies into two groups like some demented carnival game. Group 1 gets praise and encouragement, basic human decency that shouldn't need a PhD to figure out. But Group 2, they got the full psychological beatdown, constant berating, harsh criticism, and being told they stuttered even when their speech was smoother than butter on a hot skillet. These so-called scientists deliberately shattered these children's confidence just to test some half-baked theory about stuttering. Some of those poor kids developed lifelong speech problems that followed them like shadows for decades. The University of Iowa finally crawled out of their ivory tower to apologize in 2001. 62 years too late, and about as useful as chocolate teapot in a lab fire. Those children lived their entire lives carrying psychological scars inflicted by the very people who swore to first do no harm. Number 8, Operation Midnight Climax, 1950s to 60s. This one sounds like the fever dream of a conspiracy theorist who's been hitting the moonshine too hard, but it's real and declassified. The CIA, those brilliant masters of subtlety, literally hired prostitutes to drug unsuspecting Johns with LSD, while federal agents watched through one-way mirrors like perverted peeping Toms with security clearances. Picture this masterpiece of tactical thinking. They set up actual brothels in San Francisco and New York, complete with recording equipment and observation rooms that'd make a reality TV producer jealous. These poor bastards would show up thinking they were getting some companionship, but instead got a surprise chemistry lesson courtesy of Uncle Sam's pharmaceutical cabinet. Meanwhile, government spooks sat behind mirrors taking notes like they were studying lab rats in a maze, except the maze was a bedroom and the cheese was mind-melting hallucinogens, all in the sacred name of testing mind control and truth serums, because apparently the best way to unlock the secrets of human consciousness is through involuntary drug-fueled encounters with government-funded working girls. How long did this psychological horror show ran for? Not months, not a quick weekend experiment, but years of destroying lives and sanity. How many people got permanently scrambled by this brilliant operation? We'll never know the real damage because those geniuses at Langley destroyed most of the records faster than evidence at a mob trial. Their official response when this nightmare finally came to light? Oops, our bad. Number 7, the car crash memory study, 1974. Elizabeth Loftus proved that your precious memory isn't some fancy video recorder tucking away perfect footage. Nope, it's more like a drunk artist with a creative relationship with reality and a habit of making stuff up when nobody's looking. She shows a bunch of folks videos of car accidents. Nothing fancy, just your standard fender benders that happen every Tuesday on Main Street. Then comes the million-dollar question: how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? Simple enough, right? Well, hold on to your tail feathers, because this is where the magic happens. Some people got asked about cars that smashed into each other, while others heard bumped or contacted. One measly word change, just swapping out a verb like you're trading chickens at market. That single word manipulation made people guess higher speeds faster than a cat up a tree, but it gets worse. These folks started remembering seeing broken glass that was never there in the first place. Their brains just conjured up shattered windshields like some twisted fairy godmother granting wishes nobody asked for. This research didn't just revolutionize eyewitness testimony, though watching lawyers squirm was probably worth the price of admission. It proved something more terrifying than any horror movie. Your memories can be altered just by someone asking the right questions with the wrong words. Sometimes I think forgetting might be the only honest thing our brains do. Number 6, the Facebook Emotion Experiment, 2012. Well. Welcome to the brave new world, you digital lab rats. It's the 21st century where you don't need a fancy laboratory to experiment on people. Just an algorithm with the moral backbone of a soap bubble at a cactus farm. In 2012, those Silicon Valley geniuses at Facebook decided to play puppet master with nearly 700,000 users' emotions. And they didn't bother with that pesky little thing called asking permission first. Picture this stroke of ethical brilliance. They quietly started tweaking people's news feeds like a DJ mixing tracks. Except instead of music, they're mixing human misery and manufactured joy. Some folks got fed a steady diet of positive posts, puppies, weddings, inspirational quotes that'd make a greeting card blush. Others got the full doom and gloom treatment, breakups, layoffs, and existential dread served fresh daily. Then these corporate lab coat wannabes sat back with their clipboards and measured how it affected users' own posts, like they were studying rats pressing buttons for cheese. Think about that for a hot minute. They were deliberately trying to make people sadder or happier, just to see if emotions spread through social media like gossip at a church social. You didn't sign up to be a lab rat when you clicked accept terms and conditions faster than a cat chasing a laser pointer. Damn, that looks dumb from here. But if you were scrolling Facebook that year, congratulations. You were part of their emotional manipulation study, whether you liked it or not. No consent forms, no ethics review board, no, hey, mind if we mess with your brain chemistry for science? Just corporate scientists in hoodies treating your feelings like data points in a spreadsheet, then acting shocked when people started asking uncomfortable questions about digital manipulation. Trusting a social media company? Sure. Right after I deadlift a server farm and dunk it in the neighbor's pool. Number 5, the Little Albert Experiment. It's 1920 and some fancy psychologist thinks he's smarter than a fox in a henhouse. His brilliant idea? Let's terrify a baby, for science. So there's this innocent 9-month-old baby, little Albert. Kid's probably dreaming about milk and nap time, not knowing he's about to become psychology's most famous victim. But here's where it gets darker than a moonless barn. John B. Watson decides this baby is his ticket to proving classical conditioning works. Now pay attention, barn cats, because this is where the story goes from questionable to downright evil. They took cute, fluffy animals, the kind that make babies giggle and reach out with those tiny, grabby hands, and turned them into nightmare fuel. Every time little Albert reached for a white rat, they'd slam a steel bar with a hammer right behind his head. Imagine the loudest, most terrifying sound you can think of. Then multiply it by the confusion of a baby who doesn't understand why the world just became hostile. But it gets worse. They didn't stop at rats. Oh no, that would have been too merciful for these academic sadists. White rabbits, cotton balls, even Santa Claus masks. Anything white and fuzzy became a trigger for pure terror. They systematically rewired this kid's brain like they were programming a broken toaster. Now, I've seen some things that would make a barn owl lose its lunch, but here's the part that makes my fur stand on end. These so-called scientists never bothered to fix what they'd broken. Little Albert got pulled from the study before they could reverse the damage. Think about that for a hot minute. They gave a baby lifelong phobias, documented it all nice and neat for their fancy journals, then packed up and left when the funding dried up. That's like setting fire to someone's house, taking pictures for your photo album, then driving away while it burns to the ground. Watson got famous. His research got published. His career flourished, but little Albert, he lived the rest of his life afraid of things that should bring comfort: white, fluffy animals, cotton, anything that reminded his broken brain of that steel bar crashing behind his head. The real question, my fellow barn cats, is this: how many other little Alberts are sitting in research files right now? They're suffering, dressed up in fancy academic language and filed away as necessary for the advancement of science. Number 4, MK Ultra sub Project the 68. Meet Dr. Ewan Cameron, a psychiatrist who looked at the human mind and thought, you know what this needs? A complete factory reset. This walking nightmare in a lab coat believed the best way to treat mental illness was to completely erase someone's personality and start from scratch, like reformatting a computer, except the computer screams and has a family. At a Montreal hospital, a place where people went seeking help, mind you, Cameron subjected his patients to something he cheerfully called psychic driving. Sounds harmless, right? Like some new age therapy with crystals and meditation music. This revolutionary treatment involved wiping people's memories cleaner than a Sunday dinner plate using electroshock therapy, then strapping them down and playing recorded messages on endless loop for weeks. We're talking about people who walked in complaining about a little anxiety or depression, then left unable to recognize their own children or remember their own damn names. These weren't informed volunteers who knew what they were getting into. These were sick people who trusted their doctor to help them feel better. Instead of healing, they got turned into unwitting test subjects for the CIA's mind control program, like lab rats, except rats get better treatment and cleaner cages. The lawsuits are still dragging through courts today, decades later, because some wounds never heal and some crimes are too monstrous to ever get fully punished. Those families are still fighting for justice while the government shuffles paperwork and pretends this was just an unfortunate medical experiment gone wrong. Number 3, the Rat Park Prison Test. You know those fancy addiction studies where rats in little cages get hooked on drugs faster than politicians make promises? Well, one team of scientists decided to flip that script and ask a question that apparently made some very important people sweat through their 3-piece suits. What if the cage itself was the real problem? So these researchers, bless their naive little hearts, created something they called Rat Prison. Not the fluffy, enriched wonderland of the original Rat Park, but an environment designed to be pure psychological torture. Cramped spaces that'd make a sardine claustrophobic, constant noise, unpredictable conditions that'd drive a saint to drink, and absolutely zero escape. Then they gave these tortured critters access to drugs and sat back to watch the show. Within hours, not days, not weeks, but hours, they witnessed self-harm, vicious aggression, and complete psychological breakdowns. This nightmare experiment worked better than a Swiss watch. It perfectly mirrored human trauma responses in prisons, urban poverty, and every other hellhole where desperate people turned to substances just to survive another day. A blind mule could have connected the dots. The parallels were so obvious. The results were so damning, so politically explosive. Funding got yanked faster than a ripcord on a busted parachute. No published data, no follow-up studies, no academic discussions. Number 2, the Stanford Prison Experiment, 1971. Philip Zimbardo decided he wanted to study prison psychology. So naturally, he thought the best approach was to turn Stanford University's basement into a mock prison and throw a bunch of college kids into roles as guards and prisoners. Sounds harmless. Within days, not weeks, not months, but days, these fresh-faced college boys playing guard were psychologically torturing their classmates with verbal abuse, solitary confinement, and systematic humiliation that'd make a drill sergeant blush with shame. The prisoners weren't just playing along anymore. They were having complete psychological breakdowns, crying like babies, and begging to go home. Meanwhile, Zimbardo himself got so drunk on his little power trip that he started acting like a real prison warden, tossing scientific objectivity out the window faster than week-old milk. They finally shut this nightmare down after 6 days when someone with half a brain realized they'd crossed more lines than a drunken surveyor. But here's the kicker that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about human nature. Turns out participants were coached to act cruelly, like actors following a script instead of people revealing their dark nature. So was this revolutionary science about the human condition or just elaborate theater with a research grant and university backing? Sometimes I think the real experiment was seeing how long they could fool the world into believing it. Number 1, the Milgram experiment. How far will ordinary people go if someone in authority tells them to hurt another person? Stanley Milgram, a man who looked at human nature and decided to poke it with a very sharp stick, designed an experiment to find out in barn cats. The answer should keep you awake at night wondering about your own neighbors. These poor bastards thought they were just helping with some boring learning study. You know, the kind where you sit around memorizing word pairs and counting how many jelly beans fit in a jar. Instead, they became the real subjects in a psychological horror show that'd make Stephen King take notes. They got told to give increasingly powerful electric shocks to some poor soul in another room every time they flubbed an answer. Started small, just a little zap to get their attention, but then it kept climbing. 75 volts, 150 volts, 300 volts. And just when you think, surely these decent folks would say, enough is enough, these folks would go all the way up to a bone-rattling 450 volts that could stop a horse's heart. The shocks weren't real, but these participants didn't know that. They heard screaming that'd curdle fresh milk, desperate begging that'd break a stone heart, then, eventually, silence. Dead, terrifying silence from the other room. But here's the gut punch that'll make you question every human being you've ever trusted. 65% of them, nearly 7 out of every 10 ordinary, decent people, kept cranking that dial all the way to 450 volts. They thought they were potentially someone, and they did it anyway because a man in a lab coat said, "Please continue." This wasn't about sadism or psychopathy. These weren't monsters hiding in human skin. These were your neighbors, your co-workers, your Sunday school teachers, who became willing participants in what they believed was torture simply because someone with perceived authority told them it was necessary for science. Milgram proved that your average Joe could become part of an atrocity with nothing more than a clipboard, a lab coat, and the magic words, "The experiment requires that you continue." Makes you wonder who you'd become if someone in authority asked you to cross that line, doesn't it? Now here's your homework. Drop a comment telling me which one made your tail bristle the most.